British county of Cornwall is Tintagel, where Arthur came into the world. As fantastical as his life was, so was his beginning. His tale begins nearby, in the castle of the Duke of Cornwall and his beautiful wife, Igraine. Igraine had a passion for another nobleman, Uther Pendragon. The feeling was clearly mutual. The Duke felt he had to act to save his marriage, so he locked up Igraine in his summer residence. The jealous Duke sent his wife away to the safety of the fortress of Tintagel, hoping that this would stop her and Uther Pendragon from consummating their love. But Uther Pendragon, says Geoffrey's tale, asked a sorcerer to make him look like the Duke, so he could enter the fortress unchallenged. That sorcerer was the wizard Merlin. Merlin agreed to Uther Pendragon's request on condition that any child born of their union be handed over to him. Uther lustily agreed. One night, disguised as the Duke of Cornwall, Uther Pendragon entered Tintagel and seduced Igraine. And Arthur was born. On the face of it, the story has no basis in history. The ruins here belonged to a medieval castle built after Geoffrey wrote the legend. Why then would Geoffrey locate Arthur's birthplace here? Perhaps he knew that Tintagel was a real settlement in the Dark Ages. And remarkably, there are clues that it was. In 1998, archaeologists were digging in these remains near to the main ruins. Chris Snyder, archaeologist at the Marymount University, followed the excavations closely.
During the recent excavations, they uncovered a slate that was being used as a drain cover. It was originally part of another structure. When they turned it over, they found this wonderful inscription, which is very exciting news for historians and archaeologists of the 5th and 6th century.
They were excited because the inscription was written in 5th century Latin. It meant that Tintagel was in fact occupied in the Dark Ages, the time when Geoffrey says Arthur lived. But could a future warrior king really have been born here? The Latin slate is a revealing clue. In the Dark Ages, very few people could write. Those who could usually lived in a monastery or a palace. Initially, the remoteness of Tintagel suggested a monastery. But archaeology showed it wasn't a monastery. It was a palace, to judge from the heaps of broken pottery found here, most of it dating from the 5th century. Many experts believe the Arthurian legend is a clear indicator that one great king, perhaps called Arthur, was responsible for these military successes.
Our great problem with Arthur is that there must have been a lot of other warriors around at his time, little though we know of it. We need to know why it is that he got picked out as the great hero everyone remembers. I think that because he's associated with a list of battles, which we can't credit to other leaders, and because he's remembered first and foremost as a war leader, he probably was a real human being.
So what we've got now is a warlord with a fearsome reputation for keeping the Anglo-Saxon wolf at bay. But what about his opulent lifestyle, his castles? As we shall see, not all of that is pure fantasy. In Geoffrey of Monmouth's medieval account of Arthur's story, the reward for his victories is to be crowned king of all the Britons. And it's only in later versions of the story we're told that Arthur ruled from Camelot. But is there any evidence for such a place? This is the classic image of Camelot, the romantic castle city at the heart of the Arthurian legend, where the bloodied but victorious Arthur rules the land with his beloved Queen Guinevere and his faithful knights at his side. But stone castles like these date from the Middle Ages. They're a far cry from the Dark Age earthen stronghold of a real Arthur. A 5th century Camelot would have been a hill fort. Identifying which one has proved a headache for Arthurian sleuths. Dark Age kings were always moving between forts. But in another corner of southwest Britain, in Somerset, historians and archaeologists have stumbled upon remarkable leads. The clues were first spotted as long ago as 1542 by an antiquarian called John Leyland, who was fascinated by the legend of Arthur and Camelot. He found a river Cam and 2 villages, West Camel and Queen Camel, in Somerset. Their names had the same root as Camelot. But there was no castle in sight, until he took a closer look at an imposing local landmark just 4 miles from the camel villages, Cadbury Hill. Today, trees obscure much of the view, but in the 16th century, Leyland noticed that the hill was surrounded by no fewer than 4 lines of banks and ditches. They were man-made, the telltale signs of an ancient hill fort. It wasn't the image of grandeur we associate with Camelot, but in the 5th century, kings and warlords lived austere and simple lives. And the fort was so close to the camel villages that Leyland believed he had found King Arthur's Camelot. This silence has puzzled Geoffrey Ashe, one of the world's leading Arthurian experts. He embarked on a major investigation to try and establish once and for all who the real Arthur might be. He found a rare 6th century document, the Gothic History. It tells the story of the one king of the Britons that everyone agrees existed in the 5th century. Someone with close links to the Roman Empire at the time, a warlord called Riothamus. Ashe decided to compare what the Gothic history writes about Riothamus with what Geoffrey of Monmouth said about Arthur. Both men are said to have been kings in the second half of the 5th century. One of Riothamus's campaigns is dated to be around 469 AD. Amazingly, this is the very time when, according to Geoffrey of Monmouth, King Arthur was winning his battles. Indeed, the more Ashe looked, the stronger the parallels between Arthur and Riothamus became. Cadbury Hill Fort, for example. Although there are no records of where Riothamus lived, his dates precisely matched those for the refortification of the hill fort.
Riothamus was exactly at that time. He was the only documented person who could have done it. So he fitted in very well with the results of archaeology.
But the most intriguing parallel concerned their overseas campaigns. Riothamus was asked by the Roman Emperor to lead an army into France to repel the barbarian invaders there. Geoffrey of Monmouth also had Arthur campaigning in France. History is now helping to fill the Arthur-shaped hole at the heart of 5th century Britain. Still, why didn't Geoffrey of Monmouth call his king Riothamus and not Arthur?
Riothamus does not in the least suggest Arthur, but I think the clue here is that it doesn't appear to be a proper name. It's a Latin form of a British title which would have been Riothamus, which means the supreme king, the high king.
And that, of course, is precisely what Arthur was. So maybe the real Arthur was called Riothamus.
But Plato's description of Atlantis is so rich in specific detail that experts believe he transmitted a fantastical version of something that once really existed.
I think it's very likely that Plato has heard some stories of past civilizations which have come crashing down, that he's got half-remembered bits of oral history which he weaves in.
He's picking up on the stories that he hears around him in Athens, stories which were true, which he knew to be true, and he's using elements of those in creating his Atlantis story.
Plato offers tantalizing clues to the real Atlantis, from Atlantean society and culture to the shape of the island. But the most significant clue is in the destruction of Atlantis by a cataclysmic natural disaster. Scientists have found evidence that such an event really happened, 1200 years before Plato. Volcanologist Haraldur Sigurdsson can claim credit for more breakthrough discoveries than anyone else in his field. He was the first to reveal what really destroyed Pompeii. He even unearthed a lost kingdom in Southeast Asia. Now he has discovered what could be the key to the real Atlantis. In 2006, Haraldur led an expedition to the seafloor around the Greek island of Thera, today better known as Santorini. He was looking for underwater deposits from a volcanic eruption that ravaged the island back in the Bronze Age, 3,600 years ago.
I'd been working on it for several decades, working on this eruption, working on the land deposits, and always frustrated. I could never tear away this veil that was hiding the evidence. I knew the evidence was on the sea floor.
The evidence that Haraldur was looking for was a specific type of volcanic deposit, rock from what experts call pyroclastic flows, deadly hot currents of gas and volcanic material.
Pyroclastic flows are created when the eruption intensifies, and then you have a collapse of the eruption column cascading down like avalanches. Pyroclastic flows have a very distinctive rock type composed of pumice and ash and big stones all mixed together. If the eruption really had had a big impact, we would expect to find pyroclastic flows on the sea floor.
Haraldur's team studied both the thickness and the distribution of the pyroclastic flow deposits. They used sonar and a remote-controlled submersible. It was equipped with 9 cameras and robotic sampling devices.
You feel basically you're on the sea floor, and you can reach out and sample the deposits, and you can do all sorts of tests.
The expedition produced startling results. The pyroclastic flow deposits were between 70 and 260 feet thick and extended as far as 20 miles around Santorini. The total volume of erupted material was at least twice as large as previously thought.
There was one specific pot which was no different than the other, but the owner, for some reason, had wrapped it up with a piece of cloth which had survived, and I had sort of the vision of the person who, for some reason, was attached to this specific vessel and had tried to protect it with the hope of return.
Of course, they were familiar with earthquakes. An earthquake was not the end of the world. The end came after.
The troubling earthquake was just a prelude to the main event, an eruption on a scale the ancient world had never experienced.
It starts with this, the initial precursory eruption, this fine ash. This was of dusting of this yellow, also brown and black ash. This said something big is going to happen.
The island was covered in up to 6 inches of ash by the precursory eruption.
Now what comes next? The pumice layer. The pumice layer is this volcano getting really explosive.
This was an eruption known as a Plinian eruption. Its key characteristic, the mushroom shape of its column and the large amount of pumice the volcano ejects.
Exploding pumice is piling up piece by piece. This accumulates at a tremendous rate, probably about this much an hour. Piles up, but then suddenly it changes. No more pumice, instead ash, tiny particles of ash. And that's because it got super explosive.
This new eruption phase was characterized by violent steam explosions, a phreatomagmatic eruption caused by the interaction of magma and water.
What happened is the ocean poured into the vent. When the ocean pours into the vent, it is mixing with hot magma. Water and magma do not mix, they explode. And that exploded. That exploded in a series of pyroclastic flows that swept across the landscape, one after another, after another, after another, non-stop.
The pyroclastic flows of rock and gas reached temperatures of up to 700 degrees Celsius and speeds of up to 180 miles per hour.
Then at the same time, whatever's out in the middle of this volcano, which was a center island, is falling in. The caldera is collapsing into the magma chamber. Out come huge, huge rocks. Rocks the size of cars are being exploded out as ballistic missiles. And then finally, it's perhaps over. But not quite, because this huge eruption plume that's over our heads here, that is on top of this volcano, is developing electrical charges. Every little particle of ash has got an electrical charge. That charge bounces from one particle to another to another. Pretty soon, there are lightning bolts everywhere.
On the north coast of the British county of Cornwall is Tintagel, where Arthur came into the world. As fantastical as his life was, so was his beginning. His tale begins nearby, in the castle of the Duke of Cornwall and his beautiful wife, Igraine.